been speaking about what healthy relationships look like, and you've all given me some words that you've used to describe what a healthy relationship looks like. And the words you chose are caring, trust, honesty. I heard treats you well and thinks about your well-being. And we're going to keep referring to this list. We're going to, throughout these sessions, we're going to be making a list of what healthy relationships look like versus unhealthy relationships. And now that you've just told me a little bit about what healthy relationships look like, I'm going to ask you all, when you hear the words domestic violence, what is the first thing you think of?
Hitting.
Hitting. Hitting,
Bruises.
yes. A lot of, excuse me?
Bruises and stuff.
Bruises.
Yeah.
Violence.
Making someone feel bad.
Making someone feel bad. Okay,
Yelling,
Like grabbing.
right. And those are the things that many people first think of when they hear the words domestic violence. We think of some type of physical force or some type of physical activity. But now I'm going to read to you what the definition of domestic violence is. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another. So domestic violence is not always physical. It's not always about the physical. It's not about the bruise. Everybody thinks immediately they see bruises on the outside. That's what domestic violence is. Domestic violence is about power and control.
So there's different kinds of violence.
There are different types of violence, yes. There are all different types of violence. And it's important that we look at, today we're going to be looking at the wheel of power and control. It's important to look at this to understand how abusers use these tactics in relationship. I'm going to hand this out now. This is called the wheel of power and control. A group of women in the 1980s in Duluth, Minnesota, a group of advocates who worked with women who were abused women, battered women, they came up with this wheel. And the wheel represents all of the different tactics that abusers use to intimidate or to gain power and control over their partner. So in the middle, we have the words power and control, and then in all the spokes of the wheel are the different tactics. So if you look at the tactics, these are elements of domestic violence that you may not have recognized. We don't always recognize them. These are the things that we don't always talk about or that we don't consider violence, but they are acts of violence against a person because the person who's using these tactics is using them to gain power and control. So I'm just going to read a little bit off of this wheel, and then I'd like for us to discuss a little bit about maybe some of the things that you've experienced that are on this wheel, if you feel comfortable enough in talking about it. I know that this is very difficult, so it's whatever you feel comfortable in talking about. So at the top of the wheel, we have using intimidation. Intimidation is making him or her afraid by using looks, actions, gestures. It could be just a look. It's what your partner does to create that fear inside of you so that you do whatever it is that they want you to. It's smashing things. It's maybe punching a hole in the wall. It may not be using physical violence towards you, but it's using things that will intimidate and scare you. It could
so
be
like
kicking.
you can like call the police and say my husband looked at me weird?
No. We will talk about, you can't say call the police and say my husband looked at me weird, but there are certain things that you can do and that you have done in the past, which is why you're here. And we will talk more about those things if you choose to go back to your relationship. We will talk about the things that you can do for yourself. There are resources out there and people that you can call. Using emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is a big one. Putting her or him down, making him or her feel bad about himself, calling names, hearing constant name calling over and over again is emotional abuse. It makes you feel helpless, it makes you feel hopeless, it makes you feel less than. Isolation, controlling what he or she does, who he or she sees and talks to, what she or he reads, where he or she goes. It's not being able to see your friends, it's not being able to see your family or the people that you want to. It's having to constantly spend time with the person that you're in the relationship with. They're the most important. Minimizing, denying, and blaming is making light of the abuse, not taking her or his concerns seriously, saying the abuse didn't happen, Using words like, well, I didn't hit you, I'm not really abusing you. That is a tactic, that is denying, that is blaming. You're the one that made me feel like this. Using the children, making her or him feel guilty about the children. Using the children to relay messages. Using visitation to harass her or him. Threatening to take the children away. We've talked about this before too. I know a couple of you have mentioned you were afraid, you were afraid when you left, you were afraid for the children, you were afraid that they're gonna take that your partner was going to take the children. That's a tactic. Using male privilege. Male privilege is about treating her or him like a servant, making all the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define men and women's roles. Using economic abuse, preventing her or him from getting or keeping a job, making her or him ask for money, giving her or him an allowance, taking her or his money, not letting her or him know about or have access to family income. Using economic abuse, being in control of the money, gives the abuser control in the relationship. If you have control over all the money in the relationship, you have control of the person. The person who doesn't have any money loses their independence. Using coercion and threats, making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt her or him, threatening to leave her or him to commit suicide, to report him or her to welfare, making her or him drop charges, making her or him do illegal things. So in all of these, none of these tactics speak about physical abuse.
Yeah.
They talk about all different types of tactics that abusers use to gain power and control. And every relationship is different. It's difficult, the reason why we're looking at this is because it's difficult sometimes to identify what is unhealthy in a relationship. And in a lot of domestic abuse relationships, the abuse starts out very small at first. It's just in tiny little ways. So it's important to recognize the ways that abusers use power and control to gain control over their victims. So name calling, for example, name calling is something that we might think is normal, but that could change over time. Name calling could be, just something so silly at first, but it could change over time and it could turn into something more aggressive and eventually turn to violence. Does that make sense?
Is on the outside?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Has anyone ever experienced any of these? If you're looking at this, I know, Rebecca, we have talked in the past about your financial worries. Does any of this ring a bell with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird though, like he didn't start doing that until after we got married.
Doing what?
Like when we got married, he insisted that we combine our bank accounts.
Okay.
Like we've always kept separate bank accounts, that's what I always wanted, but he made it sound like it would just be better.
What was his reason for it would be better?
Just to not have money everywhere, to be able to make sure it's all secure in one place.
Okay.
But that's,
Did you feel like it would be better to have it all in one place?
I think the opposite actually. I don't think you should have everything in one place, but he wanted it there and he wanted, I guess, to just keep an eye on how much we had.
Were you able to communicate with him what you wanted?
I mean, I did, but I think at that time I just trusted him so much. We were getting married, that I didn't think he would do anything that would hurt me.
Now, when you say you had your money in one bank account, were you able to get money out as you chose?
I mean, he gave me a card, but he monitored the money a lot, so he would know if I took more than a certain amount out.
Did you have to show receipts, or did you have to tell him? You did.
But he could check on them.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did that create fear for you? Like when you would go shopping, were you always in the back of your mind thinking?
I always had anxiety about it.
Okay.
I never thought it was abuse.
Okay.
I thought he was just concerned.
Okay. So you
I
couldn't.
mean, I get it now.
Right.
It looks more like, yeah, that's what it was.
It's a way of taking, being in control of finances is a way of taking your dependence from you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not able to just go and move freely if he's in control of the finances. And he might not say, that's what I'm trying to do. He might not recognize that himself, but that is what he's trying to do.
I mean, like, I feel like I was so independent before, I feel kind of stupid for letting him do that, I guess, but.
Don't feel stupid, please. I don't, you know, and that's a very common, a lot of survivors will talk about guilt. They'll talk about, you know, feeling like maybe it was their fault, but it's not your fault. It is not your fault. And I have to give you I have to say that I give you a lot of credit for being here today. This takes a lot of courage to look at all of this. It's not only to look at all this, to look at your past, to be able to talk about it. It takes a great amount of courage. So please don't use words like stupid when referring to yourself. It takes a great deal of courage to create change. Does anybody else here, are there any other tactics on this wheel that you can maybe identify with, or Courtney?
What's wrong, Courtney? I'm seeing fine.
What are you reading?
All of it? It's very hard to look at, Courtney, I know.
I don't want to talk about it right now. Maybe next time.
That's fine. And just know, try to remember too that you're not alone. Everyone here is here for the same reason. You're never alone. There are many, many women that feel like you. Is there anybody else? Was there anything else?
I actually relate to Rebecca a lot. I don't think I recognized any of this stuff until after we were married. You know, we don't have any kids or anything yet, but I definitely won't at this point. But you know, he was a cop, and so I didn't really think twice when he would keep his gun on him at home. You know, he'd always keep it. We might be watching a movie, but it was still on him. And I think because I thought of him in that professional role, I never really thought twice about it. But now looking back, it's like, what was the point of that? It's like asserting his dominance, and like he would even talk about certain cases and how maybe he could frame me for certain things, like if I didn't do what he wanted. And I don't know, I guess I was just blind to all of that.
Right.
It's scary to think I never saw that at first.
You weren't blind to all of it. He was creating a message that he was the one that was in charge. So you weren't blind. He was creating that message.
I'm glad that I feel safer now.
That's a scary message.
It is scary.
Yeah.
And a lot of abusers will do that. They won't necessarily use physical violence. They may show their gun. They may use some type of intimidation. And it's all so that they can not have any resistance in the home. And so that you won't question him, or that, you know, you won't give him a hard time about anything.
And you think of like the worst situations in your head.
Well, especially because he would tell me certain cases of how women would be charged with things, but maybe they didn't do it, they were framed. And he made it sound like, oh, well, if you don't, you know, do X, Y, Z, like I could do that to you because of my position.
That's definitely abuse.
Yeah, I see
That's
that now.
disgusting. But I thought spouses couldn't testify against other, you know, against their spouse.
Can't be forced to.
I didn't really know the rules. The way he
can.
said it, it just made it
Force
sound
it.
like he can do it, you know.
Right.
And these are the way that abusers gain control. If they change the dynamics of the relationship. If my fiance was to come home and to say, you know, I'm never going to do domestic chores again, I would say to myself, you know what? We need to have a conversation about this. And I would sit with him and I would say, we need to have a conversation about this.
Definitely.
But if someone has power and control in a relationship and they come home and they say, I'm not doing domestic chores again, it makes the victim or the survivor, it makes them think to themselves, how am I going to handle this? How am I going to approach him? Maybe I shouldn't approach him. Maybe I should just do all of the chores.
To avoid getting hurt.
To avoid
Yeah.
getting hurt.
Or consequences.
It's all about the fear. It's all about what's going to happen next. Is there anything else that we see on this? What about isolation?
Yeah, I can identify